Hey, what's going on, everyone? In this video, we are looking at the first look for week 9. Hopefully, you guys all had a great week 8. It was a very good week for us. Cashing everything on Sunday, all the 8 slates. Monday made out in DraftKings and some on the showdown, missed on FanDuel, but all in all, it was a very, very productive and profitable week 8. Looking to do the same week 9, so let's get started. As always, appreciate it if you guys would hit the like button on the video, subscribe if you haven't already. If you want to join the team, you can visit the website. Links in description, dfsprocess.net. If you want to play on Thrive Fantasy, you can use a promo code and get some free money with your first deposit. That info's in the description as well. And without any further ado, let's get started. So, looking at an 11 game slate for this Sunday, we have some pretty fun games. Looking at the totals right now, we have currently the Chiefs have the highest total, as they usually always do, at 31.75. We have the Seahawks behind them, the Texans, the Vikings, 28 total in going up against the Lions. Have the Steelers probably in a rout against the Cowboys, as Dalton is still out. They're currently almost 14-point favorites. You have the Falcons, Chargers, Bills, Cardinals. So you have a lot of pretty solid offenses to target in terms of game stacking. Currently, the Seahawks Bills games has the highest total. I think that there's 3 games that I'm really looking at stacking up. It's the Seahawks Bills, especially a bit of the Seahawks side. I like the Chargers and Raiders side quite a bit, and I like the Detroit and Vikings game stack. And then in terms of a single stack, the Texans look good. Definitely not stacking the Jaguars with Minshew out this week. You could look at the Falcons side a bit. You could look at a couple pieces in the Cardinals and Dolphins game, but really think I'm focusing on the Raiders, Chargers game stack and the Vikings and the Lions game stack. That looks really good. And then some of the Seahawks and Bills players, especially on Seattle side. So looking at starting off at quarterbacks this week, you have Patrick Mahomes as your most expensive guy at 8,100. He checks in, playing some of his best football of the season. He has already thrown 21 touchdowns, just 1 interception. He's been the best quarterback in football this season. Coming off of his best game, I was against the Jets. 5 touchdown performance, even when they were up by multiple touchdowns. Andy Reid did not just hand off the ball, did not just allow him to hand off the ball. He continued to throw, even though they were up big in the fourth and third. Ended up throwing 5 touchdowns. So it's a really good spot against Carolina. They might be getting Christian McCaffrey back, so this game could be even a bit more competitive. But anyways, I think Mahomes, if you can get to him, if you feel good about him, he is been the best quarterback in football this season. Next up, you have Kyler Murray at 7,800. He gives you a lot of upside just because of his rushing ability. He now has rushing touchdowns in 3 straight games. He had 4 total touchdowns against Seattle with that comeback win in the fourth. He had 3 touchdowns against Dallas. Just been playing really good football. The interceptions are high. The touchdown passes are a bit lower, but no quarterback gives you rushing upside like Kyler Murray does. A really good spot against Miami, even though Miami defense has looked pretty good recently. They are still vulnerable in some spots, and I think you can attack them with Murray. But both Murray and Mahomes are super expensive. I think I will be going a bit cheaper for my quarterback. I think Russell Wilson might look the best out of the top 3, just 7,600 in a really good spot against Buffalo in terms of a high total. They put up a lot of points. He's also been just chucking multiple touchdowns every single week. Can run a little bit as well, so he gives you a lot of upside at 7,600. And then I'm not that interested in. I mean, you got to make a stand somewhere. I think I'd rather go to try to get up to Wilson than play Deshaun Watson. Not that Watson's a bad play this week, but 7,100 is decently expensive considering where he's been for most of the season. They're also going to probably be able to win this game easily against Jacksonville, so they might not have to throw a lot in the second half. So I'm not expecting a big shootout in terms of that game. Josh Allen looks fine at 7,000. His price tag is cheap. Him and Lamar Jackson are super cheap. They are great tournament plays, especially Lamar Jackson in a tough matchup against Indianapolis. But the price tag on him is the first time this season he's been below 7K. He looks really strong. Herbert continues to throw touchdowns at an incredible rate for a rookie. He has thrown 3 touchdowns the last 4 starts. Just been so good. Good spot against the Raiders. Their defense has been god awful. They're giving up 28 points per game. They only give up 6 to Cleveland because of the wind in that game, so we can kind of ignore that last game too. Then you have Matthew Stafford, 6,600, and I love that game stack. He looks strong. Some guys that I'm not that interested in are Ben Roethlisberger, Tannehill, Matt Ryan, Kirk Cousins. I like that Minnesota side, but I don't really think I can go better than paying 62 for Cousins. Go a little bit cheaper, or go up for a little bit more expensive quarterback. And then below 6,000, the guy that really catches my eye is Derek Carr at 5,700. If you need a cheap quarterback, I think he's the guy this week. He is coming off of a game where it was a wind game. He only threw for 112 yards because they couldn't throw downfield. They had to rely on the running game as Josh Jacobs had 31 carries. But now it's a completely different spot going up against the Chargers defense, who have allowed quarterbacks to kind of go up and down the field at will. They're giving up giving up over 26 points per game on the season. Before that last game in Cleveland, with the weather being so bad, he had 3 straight starts of over 20 fantasy points. He's thrown multiple touchdown passes in 6 straight before that game. And it's just been solid. 5,700 in a spot where they do have a pretty high total. It has like the 3rd highest total in terms of a game stack. And if you look at the DraftKings points given up by position here, 2 quarterbacks, the Chargers are giving up the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season in terms of DraftKings points. So I think Derek Carr looks like a pretty strong play at a really good price point. And then if you're playing Derek Carr, you probably want to stack him with one of his weapons. The weapon to stack has kind of been fluctuating this season. Henry Ruggs looked like he would be that guy, but injuries have kind of slowed him down this year. Aguilar has been playing great, but now that Edwards is going to be back, now that Edwards, I think he was back, or maybe he's probably going to be back this week. He was inactive last week. Maybe he'll return this week. If he's in, then that's going to make him maybe a cheap potential stack. But Aguilar is going to take a bit of a hit if Edwards comes back. But really, the receivers, you're kind of just hoping to get lucky with one of them. But the one guy that you feel good about stacking him with is his tight end, Darren Waller. I think they make a really good stack, a 1-2 punch. Both are cheap in terms of upside. Darren Waller at only 5,800 had his first game this season, or first game in a while with under 10 fantasy points. That's only happened twice for him. The other game was against a tough New England defense, and if you remember that game, he was a game time decision. Heading into that game, he was really banged up and didn't really contribute much because he was hurt. But other than that, he's been super solid, one of the more consistent tight end plays every single week. And on a week where, if you look at tight ends, there's not that many guys that stick out. You only have Travis Kelce, the only guy above 7K. He looks fine, but it's always tough to pay that much for a tight end. Hawkinson looks fine, but then it kind of dies off. Like, Andrews has been disappointing. It's against a really tough matchup. Noah Fant is okay, but 46 isn't super cheap, and then you don't get that many other good options. Maybe you could look at Evan Ingram against a Washington defense, or go with one of the Houston tight ends, but it's kind of ugly. You have Henry in there, and you have Jonnu Smith, but it's pretty ugly at tight end. I feel good about going with Darren Waller, a guy that gives you a high floor and gives you a really high ceiling for tight ends. And if you want to look at how the Chargers have been against tight ends, they've been giving up a good amount of fantasy points, but almost 10 fantasy points per game, ranks inside the top 10 in that department. So I feel good about going with a Carr and Waller stack. And then running back wise this week, you have Dalvin Cook in a tremendous spot to build off of his performance from last week, where he had 32 touches, 4 total touchdowns, absolutely broke the slate against Green Bay. And that Green Bay defense was susceptible to running backs, and now he gets another spot where Detroit has been getting carved up by running backs as well. Currently, Detroit is giving up the second most fantasy points to running backs. Number 1 is the Packers. That performance by Dalvin Cook definitely hurt the Packers in terms of the rush defense last week, and I think he's going up against a Detroit defense that he should be able to capitalize at home. I think he's my favorite running back this week by a pretty wide margin, because even if McCaffrey does return, he hasn't played in so long, he might be limited. The KC defense is still pretty strong. Henry, I'm not that thrilled about paying $8K for him against a solid Bears defense. Robinson's price tag has now come all the way up, $7,000 against Houston. It's a good spot, but I don't feel confident that Jacksonville will be in this game, so I think they'll probably have to abandon the run pretty quickly with them missing their starting quarterback this week, you have James Conner. Okay, he's always fine, but it's just so many good options on the Pittsburgh offense. It's tough to pick which one is going to go off every week. Chase Edmonds is too expensive, especially if Drake comes back. I'm not interested there. Mike Davis now, if McCaffrey comes back, not that interested. Elliott's just basically been unplayable now with how bad that offense has looked and against a incredibly tough Pittsburgh defense. Carson, is it playable at 65, depending on if he's in or not? Obviously, he is questionable. We'll see if he returns. Josh Jacobs had a ton of touches last week. You just hope that he can get a bit more of a factor in the passing game. That just makes him a bit of a tougher play to trust. I liked him last week. He did make that final video, so was a nice little cheap play at 6,300 last week. I'm not that interested in Gurley or Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Jonathan Taylor's questionable. You have Myles Gaskin is questionable this week. Oh, no, he's already out this week. So if you look at the Dolphins side, this is where you kind of get some value here. There's not a lot of value on the slate right now. If you look at Miami, no Gaskin, Patrick Laird questionable. Jordan Howard has been inactive for a couple weeks in a row. He hasn't played since week 4 where he got 2 carries. So with them being so banged up at running back, they did bring in Washington, but who knows if he's going to be familiarized with the playbook enough to even play much this week. But I like Matt Breida right now as a bit of a value play. Former Chicago Bears running back is going to have to step up, and he can catch some passes as well. I think he's going to be the primary guy. They could split some work between him and maybe Laird if he's in, or Jordan Howard if he becomes active this week. But I think Matt Breida is going to be the guy that is going to get most of the touches. I'm expecting maybe like 50+% workload for him, and it's a fine spot against Arizona. They are been pretty poor defensively in terms of rush defense. They're ranked in the bottom 10 in both rush and pass defense, and the Miami Dolphins offense has looked pretty solid this year, so I feel pretty solid that they'll be able to stay in this game. So far I like how it's looking with Carr, Cook, and Matt Breida as a really cheap value play. Some other running backs to look at, like Cook is the best play, I'd say, on the slate. And then for value, you have Gibson at 58, I think is interesting. Maybe you could look at David Johnson because Houston should be able to win pretty comfortably this week. And then it kind of just dies off a bit. Maybe we'll get some more injury news that will kind of shake up the slate. Maybe Gallman if Freeman misses another week. But yeah, we'll see. And then maybe you could look at one of the Chargers running backs, but I feel good about Cook and Breida right now. And moving on to wide receiver, Metcalf was huge. Liked him a lot last week. Had him in basically everything, except the early only, obviously, but had him in the main and the afternoon slate. He was great for us on both sites. And I'm expecting another solid performance from him. Especially last week where a lot of people did go to Lockett after his big performance. It was a perfect week to go back to Metcalf and had another monster 2-touchdown performance. So this week against Buffalo, it's he's matchup proof. With how good Russell Wilson is at throwing touchdown passes and just moving up and down the field, he's playable every single week. No problem with him this week. I have no problem with Hopkins either. But I think I'll go a little bit cheaper. I like some other options here, like a Julio Jones. If Ridley is out or limited, he looks really strong. You have Keenan Allen's price tag has come up a bit at $7,000 now, so he's not much of a must play like he was kind of last week at only $6,200. I do like Allen Robinson at only $6,900 at his really cheap price point. Will Fuller continues to play, he played 99% of the snaps last week. He continues to be out there on the field every single week. He looks fine. Could go a little bit better and go a little bit cheaper in that offense with Cobb or Brandon Cooks, but he looks fine. But I'm jumping on a bit of a Minnesota stack and going with Adam Thielen this week. Price tag on Thielen is at almost an all-time low. He has been disappointing the last couple weeks, especially last week. It was another one of those wind games, which kind of limited how much Kirk Cousins could even throw the football with it being super windy. And he just didn't have a good game. That was because it was a Dalvin Cook show. But this week against a really bad Detroit pass defense, I'm expecting Thielen to have a pretty big week. And I'm expecting this game to be a bit of a shootout. It does have the third highest total on the slate. So I do like Thielen a lot at only $6,700, a really cheap price point, especially with Jefferson and him being pretty closely priced now. I'd rather go to Adam Thielen. Kenny Golladay is doubtful, which means fire up Marvin Jones as a perfect run back play in that game. Without Galladay, Marvin Jones is going to be the number one receiver in this offense. He has some other guys to compete with, like Danny Amendola, but really it's going to be the Marvin Jones show. I'm expecting him to get you close to double-digit targets this week, and Matthew Stafford does like to look to his way even in the red zone as well. He did catch 2 touchdowns last week in a tough matchup. Really soft and easy matchup this week if you look at how both of these teams have been at defending wide receivers. The Vikings have given up the second most fantasy points to wide receivers, expecting a big play from Marvin Jones this week. And then you have the Detroit Lions have also been, about over almost middle of the pack, but they've still been pretty susceptible to wide receivers, and especially Thielen at a really cheap price point. I'm expecting him to have a pretty good week at home in Minnesota. And then so I think these 6 plays look pretty strong for me. I think these are the ones that I'll probably build my lineup around in terms of a first look. Just touch on some other wide receivers that I'm looking at. Besides Marvin Jones, I think you could look at Brandon Cooks at 55 against Jacksonville. You could look at Chris Kirk if you wanted to get a cheap exposure to a Cardinals player. You could look at Parker if you wanted to be a little bit different. Parker's not going to get that much ownership. Pretty nice price point. Then below 5,000, you have Sterling Shepard at only 4,800. He looks strong. You have Randall Cobb looking. He's been a lot more of a factor in that offense last couple weeks. He looks better, and then it kind of dies off. Right now, first look, I don't have any of these guys that I'm really thrilled about. Not really looking at the Jacksonville offense this week with no Gardner Minshew. Maybe you could look at one of the Danny Amendola if you wanted to go a bit cheaper in that Detroit offense, but I don't know if you really need to go that cheap. I think it's going to be Jones and Hawkinson, and then they have Swift to get some work at running back. And then defenses this week, the Steelers are $4,900. It's a really good spot for them to capitalize on that, but that is just super tough. It's definitely doable, but it's tough to pay that much for a defense because you're going to need. They cannot get you under 10 fantasy points. You're going to need them to score double-digit fantasy points at least, because probably one of these other teams below is going to, score more than double-digit fantasy points. So a little bit tougher to get to the Steelers' defense, in my opinion. You have the Jaguars starting a backup quarterback, so you could look at the Texans at 3,100. I think you could look at the Dolphins' defense as well. Murray has had some issues with the interceptions. This defense has just turned it on as of late. The last 3 weeks, they have been unstoppable. And they're going up against a good Cardinals offense, but Kyler Murray can throw some picks, maybe happens to throw a pick 6 or something. Only 2,800. I think they look playable. Maybe you could look at the no other offense or no other defense looks that strong to me below 2,800, which is why I'm kind of willing to take a shot on the Dolphins. Maybe you could look at the Titans defense, or maybe you could look at even the Cardinals defense against Tua making his second start. So that's kind of it for defense. I don't think I'll pay up. I think I'll probably go in this around 3K range with the Texans or the Cardinals or the Dolphins or some team like that. But that's pretty much it for me for the DraftKings side. Let's jump over to FanDuel. All right, over on FanDuel at quarterback, Mahomes is 9,300. It's always tough for me to pay over 9K for a quarterback on FanDuel, but you have him and Wilson if you wanted to do that this week. Both are strong options. Nothing wrong with either one. You have Murray, who looks a little bit worse than those two. You have Watson, who's 83. It's kind of expensive for my liking. I'd rather go to maybe Josh Allen, 82, or Lamar Jackson. They give you a lot of rushing upside. Big Ben is 77. I'm not that interested. Herbert is now getting up there in price, even though he's been great, but still going to need him to continue to throw 3-4 touchdowns a week at that price point. Stafford looks strong at 75. Cousins looks okay, and then you have Derek Carr at a pretty nice and cheap price point. Below 7K, you have Nick Foles and Tua, who are viable, I guess. I think I'm probably going to stick in this 7K range for a Stafford or maybe go to 7K for Derek Carr or go to 71 for Kirk Cousins. We'll see. Maybe if I continue to rock with Derek Carr over on FanDuel, we can fit in a lot of the expensive guys that I like. See if how it kind of looks. But definitely looking at Dalvin Cook this week at running back. He looks to have the highest ceiling on the slate. Other running backs, Josh Jacobs is a bit more expensive on FanDuel like he was last week, so it's tougher to get to him at 77. Gibson is 62 in play. DeAndre Swift looks okay at 6,000. Assuming Matt Breida is going to continue to be incredibly cheap over on FanDuel, he is 4,700. You're going to have all the ability to pay up for everybody that you want to. So we'll see if we stack up. We'll probably be able to stack Derek Carr with Darren Waller's only 6,400 at tight end. That looks really good to me. At wide receiver, you can get in everybody that you want going this cheap with Breida. I do like Thielen this week at 77. I like Marvin Jones. That's only 6,100. And then you could pay up for another top-end wide receiver like maybe a Julio Jones if Ridley happens to not be able to go before Sunday. And then you have 5,300 left, so maybe you can kind of pick who you want with your defense. I mean, you have pretty good cap left for these last two positions. But I think on FanDuel, these 6 or 7 guys look strong. Maybe depending on Julio, I mean, they kind of probably build around the same core on both sides. But defenses on FanDuel, the Steelers at 5,000, they're not that expensive. Compared to they are on DraftKings. Like 49 on DraftKings at 5K on FanDuel is just super different because you have so much extra cap to work with on FanDuel. But I try to get to the Steelers defense if I can. If not, maybe look at the Cardinals or Dolphins defense, or maybe look at the Giants defense or the Titans defense. But I think it's easier to pay up for defense on FanDuel, and then for some flex options in this like 6K range. Maybe Gibson at only 6,200 looks okay. Cooks at 61 looks fine to me. Kirk at only 59. You have a couple of running backs you could look at in Montgomery. Marquise Brown is only 5,800. That's like a perfect tournament play. And then it kind of just dies off, I guess. I mean, I don't know if I'll have to go super cheap at this position because I kind of got my value plays in Breida. I got my value wide receiver in Marvin Jones. A tight end I'm going to be paying up. But Sterling Shepard looks fine, Gallman, if Freeman misses another week. He looks playable. And then maybe you could look at Randall Cobb. But below 5,000, I don't see myself going with any flex play because I got my guy in Matt Breida. But that's it for the video. This is the first look. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Hopefully this week is really good for you guys. If you want to, make sure you hit the like button before you head out. And I'll be back with a Thursday night video tomorrow, but until then, peace.